All right, hello again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going over the JavaScript 6th edition text from Course Technology, and I'm up to Chapter 2, working with functions, data types, and operators. Chapter 2 begins on page, what did we say, 73? Yes. And let's just get into it. This may have to end up being a two-part lecture. I'm not sure. I'm waiting on a phone call. So, all right, our chapter objectives. Use functions to organize your JavaScript code. Use expressions and operators. Identify the order of precedence in an expression. So JavaScript in many ways is like other programming languages. It allows you to group statements together into logical units that are typically known as functions. If those functions are inside of an object, they're known as methods rather than functions. So in this chapter, we're going to just concentrate on the functions, and we'll practice using them to organize code. Another important aspect of programming is the ability to store values in computer memory and manipulate those values. So in this chapter, we'll learn about the different JavaScript data types and the operations that can be performed on each type. We'll also look at some of the different operations that JavaScript performs and how to change the order of operations. Okay? So, if the functions are inside of an object, they're known as methods. Otherwise, they're known as functions. That's what we're going to be concerned with right now. It's much later in the book. Let's see, chapter 7 out of 12, we'll talk about object-oriented JavaScript. And at that time, we'll concentrate more on methods. All right? So we're going to talk functions right here. And I guess what I'll do is I will just write a little bit of code for you. And it'll be very, very simple type of stuff that I plan on doing right here, just so you know. All right? But hopefully it'll bring most of my points across. All right. So in the last chapter, where did we put that folder? Well, that's not the one I want, but I can use that one. Okay, I will copy this folder, put it right here, and we'll call this Chapter 2. All right, and what we're going to put in here, we're not going to worry at all about any images. We're not going to worry about background text. We're going to have an index.html file and another file I'm just going to call main.js. All right, so let's open this up. I can get rid of all these comments that are in here because I put these in for the other textbook that we use. So I just want this to be as clean as I can possibly make it right now. I'm going to get rid of all this. I don't need any CSS for what I'm going to do. I'm not at all concerned right now with this thing looking nice. All right, I'm concerned with it being functional. That's all I care about in here. So let's see how small I've made this. All I'm going to put in here is a button, as I've done before. Input type equal button, name equal run, ID equal run, value equal run program, we'll just say, on click equal, we're going to say main. We're going to write our own function. It's going to be a driver. If you don't know what that means, you'll learn. It's called main. All right, so this is going to be Chapter 02 JavaScript. All right, let's test what we have so far. It's not going to go anywhere because we haven't written a main yet, and that's fine. I can close, close. Sure, I don't know if I want to save that or not, but I did. All right, there's run program, and it doesn't do anything. That's all fine. Good. All right, it's a good start. So now let's go in and add our JavaScript file. What we're going to do is we're going to come in here, and I'm going to show you this twice. The first time I write it, I'm going to write everything in one routine called main. All right, so I'm going to say function main. Now we want to know if our main is actually working. So let's put an alert in here that says I'm in main. That's all we're going to say. All right, and we'll save that as main.js. No, I don't like doing that. We'll just call it, well, what is this? This is we'll call it functions.js. That's fine. All right, so now we've got to come in here and we've got to put in a script tag. Source equals, and our functions, functions.js, and then end our script tag. Now, when we run this, if we click the button and it shows us an alert that says I'm in main, that means everything is working well. I'm in main. Good. Everything works so far. That's a good start. All right. The first time that we write this, I'm going to put everything that we do inside of main. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple variables. Now, we've done this before where we've said something like this, var num1, let's say number 1, equal, and we've said prompt, and now I can say something like please enter a number, and we'll default it to 25. All right? And we're going to do this twice. We're going to have number 1 and number 2. Please enter number 1. All right, please enter number 2. Where's my insert? There we go. All right, so let's try that and see what that looks like. Go back to here. Let's run this again. All right, please enter number 1. Please enter number 2. Everything's good so far. Sounds great. All right. Now, the problem is I could put in something that's not a number. So what I want to do is I want to convert, even if I put in there, if I leave that in there, that's not the number 25. That's the string 25. It has no numeric value. So what I want to do is I want to convert whatever number I put into, or attempt to convert it into, an integer. So I'm going to write another function here that's called parseInt, which says grab what I'm doing right there and convert it into an integer. And I'm going to do that for both of them. When I get done doing this, all right, just to see how it works, I'm going to, not echo, I'm going to document.write number 1 equals plus number 1. And then I'll do another document write that says number 2 equals plus number 2. You can see I'm building this very incrementally. All right, so let's run it. Okay, we'll leave it at 25, and we'll leave it at 25, and it says they're both 25. Well, that's good. That's pretty much what we'd want to have happen. They're both equal to 25. Now, I can come in here where we printed those out. Plus, I always forget here, is this going to be a BR tag? Let's see. What did I just do? I'd rather show you. Okay, now they're on separate lines. Okay, but what if I run this program? Let me close all the instances that I've got open. What if I run this program and I put something in there that's not a number? Oops, don't ever want to run that one. It's running the JavaScript, so, So what if I run this and I leave them both blank? So there's nothing in there. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to leave it blank and hit enter. Notice what it gives me. NaN, which means not a number. All right? So the only way that I want to do this is if what I put in there is a number. So I'm going to come into my code here and I'm going to type in this. if not is not a number, number 1, and so in other words, what I'm going to say right here is if both of them are numeric. All right? That means they're both numbers. Okay? Well, let's create a couple more variables here then. Oopsie. But let's put them up here. Var, we'll call it sum. We'll set that equal to 0. We'll have another one that we'll call diff, and we'll set that equal to 0. We'll have another one we'll call prod for the product, and we'll set that equal to 0. And we'll have another one that's called quote for quotient, and we'll set that equal to 0. Okay? So if I put actual numbers in there, now I can say sum equals num1 plus num2. All right. Diff equals num1 minus num2. Prod equals num1 times num2. And quote equals num1 divided by num2. So I'm making kind of like a simple little calculator. All right. Then I'm going to do some document.writes. Document.write. Sum is plus sum plus, and we'll put in one of those line breaks. And I'm going to do this and just copy it 4 times. So sum, difference, and that's diff, product, and that's prod, and quotient, and that's quote. Well, let's save what we've got and run it and take a look at it and see how it works. All right. We'll leave the default values that are in there, which are 25 and 25. Okay, so we'll run it, 25, 25. And nothing printed. That isn't good. What did I do? That's correct. Those are all correct. Usually when you do that, you've got a problem here where you haven't put a double quote, or you're missing quotes, or you're doing something like that. I'm looking for errors in here. Sum, document.write, sum is plus br, difference is plus diff plus br, product is plus prod plus br, quotient is plus quote. And actually, I'm just going to try to line this up a little bit so it looks a little nicer when I'm trying to go through it. But as far as I can tell, I'm not missing anything. You know what? Here's the problem. I said number 1, and there I said num. So all these num1 have to be number 1, and all these num2s, that's on me, have to be number 2. All right, now let's try it. Again, we'll leave 25 and 25 in there. 25, 25. The sum, so 25 plus 25 is 50, 25 minus 25 is 0, 25 times 25 is 625, and 25 divided by 25 is 1. Appears like it works. What if I run it again and I leave one or both blank? Nothing happens. Because what I told the system was only do the operation if both of these have got numbers in them. Okay? Now, the the sum is, this is kind of ugly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to number 1, number 1 plus number 2 equals, and now we'll put the sum in there. All right, so I need that in there every time. This is just going to look a little nicer when we actually run it, that's all. We left something off there. That's the what? That's prod. And this. All right, let's see how this looks. Again, I'm playing with aesthetics now. I'm trying to pretty the program output up. Again, we'll put different numbers. Darn it, no, I goofed something up. Number 1. What's that equal sign doing there? Those are all wrong. Those should all be pluses. Plus so what I want this to say, for example, is 25 plus 25 equals 50. That's what I'm shooting for right now. All right, so let's see if I've now fixed it. $25 and $25. 25 plus 25 is 50. Well, I got to change the signs, but notice they all work now. Got to change that to a minus, that to a times, and that to a divide. All right, looks a little bit nicer now. Again, I'm just tweaking with my output to try to make it look nice. So that shouldn't be plus. This one should be a minus, and a times, and a divide. Try it one more time. We'll put different numbers in there. We'll put in 37 and 13. 37 plus, minus, times, and divided. We can change that a little bit later. I'll show you how to make that like 2 decimal places or whatever. All right, but that's not really important right now. The point is we now have a fully functioning calculator. It's all right here. It's not very big. Okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my index file that I've got right here, and I'm going to do a file, save as, and I'm going to call this index2. All right, and in index2 we're going to call not functions but functions2. So we're going to grab functions and we're going to save that as functions2.js. All right. What I want to do is I want to know a different function for each one of those. Okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my variables that you see right here, and let's see, I'm going to take these 2 variables right there, and I'm going to move them so they're at the top of the program. And what that does is it takes those 2 variables and it makes them what's known as global. So they can be used anywhere in the program, anywhere. All right, so now with this sum, I'm going to say sum equals find sum. I'm going to write a function in just a minute. Find diff, find prod, and find quote. All right. Now, I'm not going to worry for right now whether or not these are numeric. I don't really care. I mean, it's something I want to put in, but for right now, it's okay. And then finally, I'm going to call display values. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to let the system know what the sum is, what the difference is, what the product is, and what the quotient is. Okay? So now that's it for my main function. So now I got to start writing other functions. Function find sum. Well, what sum is it's number 1 plus number 2. So I'm just going to return number 1 plus number 2. That's the whole function right there. All right, in fact, let's do this. So we've got find sum, find diff, find prod, and find quote. So I now have all that stuff done. Now I want to write these out. Well, there's my statement to write these out. So that's the function that's called display values. So function display values, and I'm going to end up writing in there all that stuff. So now what I did was, rather than doing everything in one function, I am now doing it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 functions. All right? Again, we're not going to worry about not a number right now. We will touch on that, but just not right now. So let's run this, and ideally we're going to get the same results that we did before. Well, that's never a good sign. When it does that, it means I've got a syntax error in here someplace. Let's look. Functions 2, that's the first thing. That's a good start. Find sum, return number 1 plus number 2. Find diff, return number 1, oops, that'll do it, minus number 2. Find prod, that's correct, times, find quote, that's correct. So that should be the same as this. So let's try it again. All right, 37 and 13. Now when I click run program, 37 plus 13, same output I had before. Why right now the font size is so much smaller, I'm not real positive. It is smaller, but hopefully you can still look at it and figure out that everything still works the same. The difference though is, now in this second iteration of this, I've written separate routines to do everything. All right, so keep that in mind, and now we'll start on the chapter. What I just gave you was a named function. They were related statements. They were assigned a name. Function followed by the name. All right, I call those particular functions also by putting in their name. I said var sum equal find sum. That's a function call. In a little bit, we'll also look at anonymous functions. Those are functions that don't have a name. So if you want to reuse the function, you use a name function. If you only want to run it once, you use an anonymous function. Well, the name functions are easier to work with, and since we're just learning, that's why I decided to do them that way. All right, so we used function. For example, we had here function, then the name of our function. So for example, we had find sum in there. We didn't have anything we passed into it, so there were no parameters in here, so it was just an open and closed set of parentheses. Then in curly braces, we said return number 1 plus number 2. When we did our last function that was called display values, we had here function, and the name was display values, and we passed into it sum, diff, prod, and quote. So we had 4 parameters, and then we printed them out in here. But notice with an anonymous function, there's no name. So an anonymous function is designed to be a one and done. parameter is information that the function needs in order to do its job. Inside of the curly statements, you put the function statements which do the actual work. I have already taken those functions and put them in an external file. All right, you already saw that. That's what we did. And I showed you how to call, or what's also called invoke the functions. So that's a function invocation, that's a function invocation, that's a function invocation, that's a function invocation. You notice with these first 4 lines, we're saying take the result of whatever that function is and assign it to that variable. Function result assigned to that variable. Function result assigned to that variable. Function result assigned to that variable. This one doesn't have an equal sign. So these 4, since they have an equal sign, must all have return statements in there. Return, 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 return. This one we're not assigning to anything, so there is no return statement in it. All right? Anything that you do with this, that you do utilizing unnamed functions, you can always rewrite using named functions. All right? What you pass to a function are also known, they're sometimes called arguments, and they're sometimes called parameters. It depends on the book you read. Okay? All right. Handling events. Well, you've already seen this. I gave you something like this, but not this example. I had input type equals button on click equal main, which means that button that came up that said run program, when we click it, it was supposed to call main. And that's exactly what it did. All right. Now, what they're mentioning here is you can add an event handler like this, or you can specify the function as the property of an object and use an add event listener. All right. The way that I showed you is probably the easiest way of doing it. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, browsers, the Internet Explorer browser versions 8 and below don't use what's called an add event listener like we have here. They don't do that. They instead use what's called attach event. All right, there'll be more about that in the next chapter. So for right now, please don't worry about it, okay? All right, locating errors in the browser console. I showed you that in the last chapter, how you can come in here and you can be running. You know, I'll do the same kind of thing I did earlier. I'm going to come in here and where I've got this. In fact, let's put the same error we had in there before. I left that minus sign out. So it said return number 1, number 2. That was an error. So then I come in here and I run the program. Still looks the same, but when I click run, nothing happens. But if I hit my F12 function key on the top, now these are my Chrome developer tools. All right. And I'm looking in here and it's like, okay, it's got something here. Main is not defined, unexpected identifier. Where the hay is that? Well, it's got index 2 here. And it looks like it's got something that it doesn't understand. It says main is not defined. Okay, so there's no main. So what does that mean? Well, since main is defined in our other function, for some reason it's not letting me open the other one. All right, that means I have to go back in and I have to look at. That means the problem is in here someplace. So we start looking and we eventually find this. We put that back in there and everything is once again going to be hunky-dory when we go to run this. See that? Now when we run this, we get all of our answers and there are no errors. That's what the author is trying to show you in here. All right. Yeah. All right. So there's different ways. IE has got their own browser console. Firefox has got a thing called Firebug. I'm just getting used to using developer tools. Okay? There are you can go out to youtube.com and type in Chrome developer tools tutorials, and you'll find a lot of them out there. Some of them are pretty good. Some of them are not so good. All right? You've seen the return statement already. In the example that I gave you, we've got a return. In fact, we've got several returns in there. Let's talk a little bit about scope, but rather than going over this slide, let's go back to our program. Since I took those variables right there, and I defined them outside of any function, typically you do it at the top of the program as I did it. That means that those variables are what are called global variables. So they can be used in any routine here without having to do anything special. But notice sum and diff and prod and quote, those are all defined inside of main. And I want to be able to use them in another function called display values down here. So I have to pass those values in. And that's what I did there and there. All right, and that's what the author is showing you right here. So with variable scope, it's where a declared variable can be used. Global can be used anywhere. Local can only be used in the function where it's defined or if you pass it. Always use the keyword var. It says required. Technically it's not, but it's always good practice to do so. So always use var when you declare variables. All right. They even tell you some stuff in here. I don't want to go through this because they give you a bad thing that you can do and then they say don't do it. So rather than that, let's just not talk about it. All right. This is it. If you declare a function, a variable in a function, and you don't use var, it automatically becomes global. Bad practice. You should never do that. Period. All right. So JavaScript has got a bunch of built-in functions, and a couple of them, we've already looked at. All right. We looked at is NaN is not a number, and we looked at parse int, which converts a string to an integer. Parse float is the same thing, but rather than converting it to an integer, which is a whole number, it converts it to a float, which is a number that can't have a decimal place. All right. Is finite determines whether or not a number is finite or not. Eval allows you to evaluate stuff. Encode here encodes strings. We'll get into that in more depth later. And decode, after you encode them, you typically decode them. All right. So I'm going to check my time. And I'm doing fine here. I'm at 33 minutes. All right. Hopefully there's not going to be too much background noise. My wife's on the phone upstairs. So, data types. These are the data types that JavaScript allows. It doesn't technically look at something as being an integer or a float, even though there's a parse float and a parse int. It looks at all numeric values as being type number. All right? Boolean is true, false. There's no gray area for the computer. So married. So if I said married equal true, I'm married. Married equal false, I'm not married type of thing. String can be in either double quotes like they show or in single quotes. Undefined. So if I had done this in my program, if I had come through here and just said at the beginning, var sum, like that, instead of what I did if I had done this, then the value of sum would be undefined. All right, so that's what they're talking about right there. And null means empty. It literally is devoid of any value. All right. And there's the difference between undefined and null. Null just means it has never been declared. So if somebody says to me, what's your grade point average? And I don't know. Well, you wouldn't want my grade point average to be put into a computer as 0.0, for example. But if they put null in there, that would be the same thing as saying it's unknown. All right. Now, one thing about, I'm going to give you a very quick story. You may or may not like it, but very quickly, years ago, I had a friend who was in a band. And this friend of mine in the band, I went and heard them a few times. And one time when I heard them, not him, but one of the other guitarists in the group, his string broke, one of his guitar strings. And I could sort of tell, but then I noticed he went over to his amp and he turned it up a little bit more. And during the break, I talked to him. I said, why'd you do this? He said, well, my string is broke. I didn't have time to change it. We were in the middle of a song, but I just turned up the amp so people couldn't probably tell anyway. So why am I telling you this? Well, if that same person was, rather than being in a group, if that same person that we were just talking about, let's say was playing at a coffee house and had themselves a folk guitar and their string broke, everybody there would know it. Because folk guitars with a string break, they're not very forgiving. But if you've got an electric guitar and you break a string, more forgiving because you turn the amp up. So what does this have to do with anything? JavaScript is like using an electric guitar. If you forget to do things, typically JavaScript will do them for you. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do them, but it just means that if you forget to do something, JavaScript will do it for you. And 99 times out of 100, it'll do what you wanted it to do. All right? JavaScript is what's known as a loosely typed programming language. What does that mean? That means that if I'm writing a program like this, and let's just add another variable in here. So I'm going to say var age equals 21. I can do that. But then if I want to, later on in my code, I can say age equal true. And that'll work. And then later on in my program, I can say age equals hello. So what have I done there? And then later on, I can still do age equal null. So what have I done? I've declared age to be an integer variable, a number variable. Then I converted it to a Boolean. Then I converted it to a string. Then I converted it to a null. And guess what? If I run my program, it'll run just fine. The system doesn't care that I did that. So when you've got a loosely typed language like JavaScript, literally what that says is you define a variable as being a certain type, but you can change it at any time. All right, so you can be sloppy with your programming. Some people think that JavaScript is a really bad first language to learn because it can give you bad habits. All right. I see where that is the case, but yet it's a fairly simple language to learn, and that's why it's typically taught as a first language. When you've got another language, not like JavaScript, but like Java, it's strongly typed. You don't use the word var. If I want to declare a variable that's an integer, I say int, int. All right, so I have to give the data type. And once I've given the data type, I can't change it. But in JavaScript, you can. Again, very similar to what I just showed you. All right. Again, JavaScript allows you to use either whole numbers or numbers that hold a decimal place. It handles them the same way, but it allows you to make a differentiation between the two. All right. Boolean, as I mentioned, are true, false. Again, there's no gray area. It's the old joke. Can't be kind of pregnant to JavaScript. You are or you are not. True, false, 0, sometimes true is 1 and false is 0. Sometimes it's looked at as off, on, off being false and on being true, etc. Here are some examples with Boolean. All right, again with strings, either double quotes or single quotes, but it's got to be double quote, string, double quote, or single quote, string, single quote. You can't mix them in the same string. An empty string is just something with nothing in it. And it's either double quote, or single quote, with not even a blank in the middle. Again, single or double. Doesn't matter, but they must be both single or both double. Here's some examples. Some of these examples, in fact, I think all of them except the one with date use double quotes. Okay. You've already seen the concatenation operator. I've told that to you before, that when you use the plus sign with two strings, it means concatenate or glue them together. If you use the plus sign with numbers, it means add. There's also something called plus equal that you can use. So notice what we have here. Var destination equal Honolulu. Then we've got destination plus equal is in Hawaii. Well, let's look at that one in a little bit more depth. All right, so I'm going to grab that code that's right there, copy it to the clipboard, and just bring it up in regular Notepad so it looks like this. All right, this line that you see right here that's in blue, that line is the same as saying destination equals destination plus is in Hawaii. So these two lines that you see right here are equivalent. They're exactly the same. Well, as you can see, the first one is a lot less typing. Okay? In much the same way, I can come through here and I can say this. Var x equals 7. All right? And then if I want to say x equals x plus 9, I can say that. Or I can just say x plus equals 9. Either one of those. So these two things are the same. And JavaScript, like many other programming languages, allows you to use a plus equals, and you can use a minus equals. Oops, that'd be a minus. That's x equals x minus 9. Or you can use times equals, or you can use divide equals. And there's even one more that we'll talk about, but just not right now. All right? Just so you see some of these. Again, the idea is you're looking through these examples and you're learning some of the stuff that's in here. All right? So when you hear it in class, oh, I remember that. That's the idea. All right. If you put a backslash before certain characters, the ones that are shown here, it means that they have a special meaning. So if I put a backslash n, that's going to give me a new line, which is like I hit the enter key. If I put a backslash t in, that means it's like I hit the tab key. The chances are, out of all the ones that are shown right here, 99% of the time plus, you're going to use either backslash n or backslash t if you use any of them. All right? So here's the arithmetic operators right here. Plus for addition, minus for subtraction, times for multiplication, / for division, modulus that we'll talk about in just a minute, plus plus and minus minus, and negation makes something negative. These I've already went over with you, and the comparison, we'll look at those in just a second. All right? Well, let's talk about that modulo. So if I said this, let's say I've got var x equals 7. And what I want to do is I want to know whether or not x is a odd number or an even number. Now you can look at it and go, well, it's odd, Jeff, I know it is. But if I said to you, why is it odd? Well, you can't divide it by 2 evenly. So what I could say is, if x modulo 2 equal 0, which means if I tried to do a divide and it's equal to 0, document.write x is an even number. Else, document.write x is an odd number. Okay, so that's one of the ways in which you use modulo. It's the remainder. This says take that number and divide it by this and check for the remainder. If there is no remainder, it's even. If there is a remainder, it'll always be 1, so it's odd. All right? Again, we'll be going over all of these in class. You'll learn about and or and not, all these special operators that you see in here. All right? If something is a binary operator, it requires an operand before and after the operator. Well, what does that mean? That means if I say this, oops, don't need that open. So if I come in here and this is the little examples that I've been using here. If I say, for example, x equals y plus z, okay? The plus sign's binary because you need something to the left of it and something to the right of it. But on the other hand, if I say x equals minus x, all right, in that case, I don't need, this is called a unary operator. So the minus sign works with only one operand. That's the operand, that's the operator. Operand, operand, operator. And that's exactly what the author is saying on the slide that you see in front of you right here. All right, again, here are your mathematic operators. We've already looked at them a little bit. There's a couple in there that I skipped, so let's talk about those right now. All right, because I think we've looked at most of the ones that are in there. What if what I want to, oh, I don't know why I keep doing that, but what if I come in here and what I want to do is I want to add 1 to x, okay? So I've got some code in here where I say var x equals 31. And then later on in my program, so someplace later, I'm just going to put here ... There's some code in there. I don't know what it is. But I want to say add 1 to x. I want to show you a bunch of ways I can do that. I can say x equals x plus 1. I can say x plus equal 1. Those both work. We already looked at those. Or I can say x plus plus, or I can say plus plus x. This is called the post increment and the pre-increment, because does the plus plus come before the variable or after it? If it comes after the variable, it's post increment. If it comes before it, it's pre-increment. And you can only use that to add 1 or to subtract 1. So I can say x minus minus, or I can say minus minus x. So this is called the post decrement, pre-decrement. Why 2 of them? Why a plus plus, etc.? Why this? Well, what if we did this? What if I said here x var x equal 31, var y equal, we'll make it 0. All right. Now I want to show you the difference between these 4 statements here. So the first one I'm going to put in here, y equals x plus plus. Then I'm going to do a y equals plus plus x. Now think about how this would work. Let's hit enter a few times to get that out of here. All right, this says take x and add 1 to it. All right, so after we do this, say after we add 1 to 31, so x is now equal to 32. And then it says take that value and assign it to y. All right, so take that 32 and assign it to y. So y is also equal to 32. But in this case, with the pre-increment, all right, I'm sorry, I did it backwards. Let's try that again. This says take whatever is in x and assign it to y. So when we get done, y is equal to 31. Where did I get the 31 from? Right here. Then add 1 to x. So x is now equal to 32. On the other hand, if I do it the other way, now it says add 1 to x, meaning add 1 to that, make it 32, then take the value and assign it to y, so they're both equal to 32. Hopefully by seeing that, you see the difference between them. And it's very similar if I do the minus minus also. So if I say y equals x minus minus versus y equals minus minus x, grab those values that are there. In this case, we would take x and assign it to y, so y would be 31, then we'd subtract 1 from x, so x would be 30. All right? And in the other example, the one that's down at the bottom here, we remove 1 from x, so 31 minus 1 would be 30, and then we assign that value to y. Now that may not totally make sense to you right now, but take a look at what's in the book, and if you have to, watch this tape more than once. And again, we'll be going over it in class as well. All right, the Java interpreter, as I said, it tries to be as forgiving as it possibly can. So as it says, it attempts to convert strings to numbers. All right? Does not convert strings to numbers when using the addition operator. You'll have to see that in action. I just gave you the prefix and the postfix with the plus plus and the minus minus. So you just saw all those. And they give you examples here in the book. If you like the book's examples better, go for it. All right. We already talked about the equal sign, and we mentioned that a single equal means assignment, not equality. If you're checking for equality, it's a double equal sign. So, as I mentioned, there's an equal, a plus equals, a minus equals, a times equals, a divide equals, and a modulo equals. You can use any or all of them. Here's a code example from the book. And again, sometimes the best thing to do is to just look through that and actually go and key some stuff in to take a look at it. That's about the only way it'll start making sense. All right, comparison operators, as it says, compares two things. If x is greater than y, if x is less than y, etc. And it's always, again, since that's a Boolean expression, that comparison, so it always has to be true or false after the compare. If they're numbers, it compares them numerically. If they're not numbers, it compares them alphabetically. All right, they show you some examples here. Now this one looks a little crazy. Equal, equal, equal. What the heck does that mean? Well, again, going back to these examples that I've been just putting up here for you. If I come through here and I say this, var x, let's use something else, var a equals 71. Var b equals double quote 71 double quote. If I say this, if a equal b, even though one's a string and one's a number, what JavaScript tries to do is it says, oh, you want to compare the number with a number. So it strips those off, and that actually returns true. But on the other hand, if I say if a equal b, that returns false. Because it's not only does it say do they have the same value, but are they the same data type? And it says that's a number and that's a string, so that's why that fails, and it returns false. Again, the best thing you can possibly do here is to just create yourself a little JavaScript program and start messing around with it. There's also a conditional operator that's sometimes called the question mark colon operator. Let's look at an example of that. Again, let me hit enter a few times. I want to get all that stuff back up to the top. So I'm going to say here var x, I don't want to use x, I was using that before, var m equals 21, var n equals 18. And we'll have var max. We won't give it a value, so its value right now is undefined. So we want to say here if m is greater than n, then we're going to say the max, the biggest number, is m. Makes sense, right? Else max equal n. All right, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's perfect code. Makes total sense. Won't give me any errors, etc. It'll work just fine. But if I want to, I can write that, streamline it a little bit. So instead of all this that you see here in blue, so instead of all that, I can write in this. Max equals, and I put in parentheses, m greater than n. Then I put question mark, which means if that's true, m, then colon, meaning if it's false, n. So I can use, instead of these 6 or so lines, I can use one line. This says make the comparison. Is m greater than n? If it's true, you do what comes after the question mark. So it says take m and assign it to max. If it's false, you take n and assign it to max. It's called the question mark colon operator. It's also called the ternary operator because it actually requires 1, 2, 3 different operands. There's their example. It's probably no better or no worse than what I just gave you. All right. Now, a couple things. They talk about falsy and truthy, which is kind of weird words, but they're actually words that are used in the language. If you set up anything, any of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values here, any of these, single quote, double quote, minus 0, 0, NaN, null, or undefined, those are all considered false. They can't be true because none of them have a value. You say, well, that has a value of 0. Not technically, not to the system. Anything else, all right, so these are falsy values, these 6. Anything else is called truthy. All right. Now, if you were we will talk in class about anding and oring and not. Okay? Not is a negator. So it changes false to true and true to false. If I say I'm not married, okay, as an example, that means that married would be equal to false. If I said I'm not married, then I am married type of an idea. All right. Very quickly to give you the and the ors. Let's assume that I say, well, I've just moved here and I'm going to have a party. And if you want to come to my party, there's 2 criteria that you have to meet. Okay? You have to be greater than or equal to 21 because I'm going to serve alcohol. And you have to be going to the Rankin campus. You know, you must be going to Rankin. So both of those have to be true. So you have to be greater than 21, greater than or equal to, and you must be a student at Rankin. Then you'd use the and here. If either one of those is false, if you're less than 21, or if you're not going to Rankin, you can't come to the party. So what if I decide I've done that, now I've got all this food and beverages, etc. for 100 people, and now only one person has told me they're coming. So I decide to change it from and to or. That means as long as you're over 21, or you're going to Rankin, or both, then you can come to the party. So with and, every little subcondition has to be true, or the whole thing is false. With or, as long as any subcondition is true, the whole thing is true. Only if all subconditions are false is the whole thing false. All right? Most of the stuff that you see in here with arrays, and we've looked a little at the conditional operator, but most of this is all stuff we'll cover in later chapters. So there's other operators. We'll cover, again, almost all those in later chapters. All right? Hopefully you learned back in the day when you were going to school that maybe it was 8th grade algebra or whatever. For me, it was 9th grade algebra with Mr. Schoenfeld. I'll always remember. Okay? And you do multiplication and division before you do addition and subtraction. So in other words, if I've got a statement that looks like this, if I say var j equals a plus b minus c times d divided by e, something like that. I do this first, right there, because you do multiplication and division before you do addition and subtraction. So I do that first. Then I take the result of this and I divide it by this. I do that second. Then I take the whole result of that, okay, and I add a to it. Then I add b to that. Okay, so you can kind of see, if I decide what I want to do first is this, before I do anything else, then I have to take this and put it in parentheses. That's what I'm getting to. Now I do that first. And if I have multiple sets of parentheses, I work from the inside out. So here, whoops, that should have been that C shouldn't have been removed. So now in here, I would do this first. I would add these two, then I would take the result and subtract that. Then I would multiply that by this. Then finally, I take the whole thing and I divide it by that. So you can always override by using parentheses, bottom line. And that's what they're talking about in here with all these examples. So we finished the second chapter. We talked a lot about functions, and I showed you two programs, one that had one big function that did everything, and then we took the same program and broke it up into about 6 functions. All right, we made global variables, we used parameters, so you got to see that. We did not go at all into anonymous functions, which are unnamed functions, but we'll do that later. We talked about data types. We talked about a loosely typed language versus a strongly typed language. We talked about the number types that are supported by JavaScript, the Boolean types, strings, single quotes, or double quotes. A little bit about the escape character. We've talked about expressions and precedents and how stuff is evaluated. That's it for Chapter 2. When I come back in a little bit, I will go over Chapter 3. Chapter 3 begins in your book on page 147, and it's building arrays and controlling flow. All right, so we'll be back with that lecture shortly.